All right, welcome back to your last section for the chapter 22 video lectures. So let's talk about responses to industrialization, right? So how do people react to the increasing wage gap, to the increasing abuse of factory workers? So one of the kind of like first reactions is a group of people who become known as the Utopian socialists. And the socialists, these guys believe that everything, all the economic process, all the benefits, the profits, the work, everything should be shared amongst the population in equal amounts. So have complete equal distribution of wealth, equal economic standing, so there's no rich or poor, everyone's the same. And they believe that, this is the next step after having political equality. The next step is to have economic equality and therefore have true equality in society. They argued that the market system under the capitalist theory would get some people rich and some people poor, right? Rich people remain rich or grow richer, while the poor people, regardless of how much they work, will remain poor. And so what they try to do, they start creating these small communities. They'll build factories out in the countryside, away from the urban cities or the urban centers, the industrial centers, and have factories there where 50 or 100 families will work together. And these families who work will be part of this community. They tended to be of the same religious faith, same religious beliefs. They all had equal share in the profits of their factory. So whatever money was made by producing and selling, shoes or clothing or furniture or whatever, each member, each employee had an equal share of the profits. And everyone worked, the same hours. It wasn't that some people just worked, long hours and other people get to, like an owner or a supervisor or a manager gets to do nothing. And so they believed, again, by having equal share of the wealth, then you have true equality. And what ended up happening, we see these little communities pop up all over England and in some parts of Europe and even in the United States, is that they eventually show that this idea of socialism, right, is actually possible, where people can work together, so that if you get sick or you get injured, the rest of the community helps you out. If you die, the rest of the community helps out your family. Everyone works together, everyone shares responsibilities together. And it started working only but within this small scale, right, with 50 or 100 families. But the belief was, at least by the mid 1800s, that you can apply these socialist beliefs about equality to the entire society, to the entire country, and eventually to the entire world, right? And that socialism could become the next step in kind of like enlightenment improvements. So we have democracy, we have republic, we have constitutional limits, we have voting rights, and then they believe that the next step is socialism. So the famous philosophers behind the idea of expanding socialism and making it not just a small isolated community, but this worldwide thing, would be the famous philosophers called Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And Marx is the most famous of the two. They write a book called the Communist Manifesto. And they're going to argue that the entire capitalist system was designed to keep the rich rich and the poor poor. And therefore, you couldn't fix it, you couldn't alter it, you couldn't modify it, you simply had to replace it and start from scratch. Now, the capitalist system that they were looking at and the one that was dominant during the 1800s, during the Industrial Revolution, is something known as Laissez-faire capitalism. And Laissez-faire in French means hands off. And that's literally what's happening with the role of the government. The government's hands are off when it comes to business regulation. So the government does not regulate how much hours per week employees are forced to work. The government does not regulate or get involved in businesses when the businesses are firing people who get injured, or not paying any support or care for people who get sick, or if they die. The governments don't tell the businesses what to do when the businesses, the factories, are producing tons of pollution and dumping it in the water, in the soil, or into the air, which will get other people sick. So the capitalist, laissez-faire capitalism, right, is very, because the government has no control and allows these businesses to run however they want, the workers are viewing that the system, the economic system, is flawed, right? These people who happen to have been rich at one point and therefore be able to afford to purchase a factory, now they are the factory owners, and no matter how hard a low-class, working-class worker, works, they'll never be able to rise up. They'll never be able to move up because they'll never get paid enough to move up. So capitalism under the socialist, later on we could say Marxist or even communist views, the capitalist system is flawed and therefore it needs to change. And again, Marx and Engels, they view the society as into two classes, right? There's the rich, which are the capitalists, right? So middle class, upper class, those are the capitalists. He also calls them the bourgeoisie, which traces back to the French Revolution, and also the proletariat, which is the working class, which is of course the larger of the two social classes. Now, Marx and Engels also believed that it wasn't just the economic system that worked against the workers, worked against the proletariat, but everything, society and culture and even the government. So, for example, they said that that religion was a drug, that it simply was used to confuse people so that they worry more about what happens in the afterlife than worry about what's happening in this, physical life that they live in. They said that things like art and music, and later on film and television, that all of those are distractions, and that the capitalists use these distractions to entertain the people and keep the people kind of like dumb and distracted, and therefore they don't really realize what the true problem was, which is the economic inequalities in society. So Engels, again, capitalism is flawed, society and culture support the flawness, and the government does as well. So, because remember, if you're a factory worker and you're seeing that your friends, your co-workers are getting injured and there's no one's stepping in to help them, right? The government's not stepping in to put limits on the abuse of the businesses, then you're going to see if you're a Marxist, if you're a socialist, you're going to believe that, the government and the business owners are working together. They're teaming up, and the people who are going to get screwed over are going to be the lower classes, the proletariat. So Marx, Engels, they believe that the system is so flawed, the system is so broken, the system is so messed up that you can't just fix it or repair it, you have to overthrow it. You have to overthrow capitalism, you have to overthrow the government, you have to overthrow religious beliefs, you have to overthrow traditions, you have to overthrow everything and start brand new. And this new system is going to be run, they call it the dictatorship of the proletariat, where everyone in society, all the workers, will be equal. And therefore everyone has an equal voice in the economy, an equal voice in politics and government, and everyone has equal power. So there's no rich, there's no poor, everyone's be equal. And because everyone is equal, there won't be a need for government, because everyone's going to simply work together. right? You don't need to collect taxes. You don't need to pay taxes because everyone is going to work together to solve whatever local community problems there might be. So, for example, if in the past you might collect taxes to build roads and bridges. Well, the communists, the socialists, the Marxists will say, well, you don't need to collect taxes. The people who live by that bridge or live by that road, they'll build it. To the benefit of everyone, because they understand they're going to put aside their private, selfish beliefs, but put aside that and replace it with a more public awareness, where you do things because it benefits the entire society, this entire community, and they really believe that this was the only way to have equality and the only way to have freedom. Because if you're a worker and you're getting exploited and abused, are you really free? Right? And Marx and his supporters, his followers, would say no. So they believed that a revolution was necessary to completely overthrow everything and start brand new. And we're going to see in the 20th century where those theories about revolution are actually going to take place, right? In communist revolutions, starting out with the first one being in Russia in 1917. Now, those were kind of the more radical elements of socialism that completely changed everything. There were other socialists that weren't as radical, weren't as crazy, weren't as extreme. They wanted to change the government, change the system, change the economy as it is now, right? Work within the system, not like completely overthrow it. So, for example, some of these socialists, they're gonna say, okay, why don't we make sure that the government provides retirement, like Social Security retirement? Why don't we make sure that if you get fired or injured at a job, the company has to pay for your unemployment, or at least temporarily? Why don't we make sure that healthcare is provided for everyone? Why don't we make sure that instead of working 80 hours a week, you only work 40 hours a week, and that's full time? Why don't we make sure kids aren't forced to go to factories, and instead they go to school and get educated? Why don't we make sure that every person can vote, every male at least? That's the first step, is male. Why don't we make sure that factories don't pollute the land and the soil and the air and the water? Because if you have that pollution, you're going to get people sick, and you have people sick that can't work, and the economy is going to weaken, the country is going to weaken. So there's a lot of social reforms in the later half of the 1800s, as people are looking to the government to solve some of the problems that industrial revolution has created. At the very same time, the workers are taking on a more active role by creating trade unions or labor unions or workers unions. Right? So basically, workers get together and say, we are going to put a list of requirements, list of things we want from the business owners, from the factory owners. And if they don't help us, or they don't agree to some of our demands, then we will go on strike. And by going on strike, you have an empty factory, and therefore every day the strike occurs, the business owners is going to lose money. Now the workers are going to lose money because they're not getting paid, because they're not working, but they believe that this is what they can do to weaken or to force the factory owners to comply to their demands. So we're going to see an increase in trade unions. As more and more people are going to join trade unions, more workers are going to join trade unions, labor unions. And even though it's risky, because the governments many times are going to pass laws saying trade unions are illegal, and if you try to join one, it's a crime. The business owners are going to hire private soldiers, private police forces to break apart trade union meetings or labors or strikes and use violence against them. But so some of these social reformers are using the laws of the government to try to get the government to help and fix social society's problems. Sometimes the workers take it upon themselves to fix their own problems through trade unions and collective bargaining. So we see a lot of these movements to kind of bring more government intervention, less laissez-faire capitalism, and more rights to the workers, right? And more opportunities for the workers as well. All right, the last thing we're going to look at is the second industrial revolution. So the second industrial revolution is a term that is used for what happens more or less from the 1870s all the way to 1914, all the way into the 20th century, all the way into the beginning of the First World War. And what happens during this kind of like 40-year period is a very rapid expansion of industrialization, where new technologies are going to be built and innovated and improved upon over and over. And new sources of energy are going to be in popular demand. So, for example, we see steel being used to replace iron. So, during this time, we see the growth of huge, skyscraper cities like New York or Chicago or London or Paris. We're going to see petroleum, gas or oil, that becomes the main energy source instead of coal. So countries or regions of the world that have petroleum deposits are going to be in high demand to be colonies. You want to colonize those territories to gain access to petroleum, because petroleum, like coal, isn't found everywhere equally. It's found in different parts of the world. This would allow the use of coal would lead to electricity. So the use of petroleum will lead to electricity. So you have more electricity, like street lights, and lighting inside the house, and that's going to lead to like movie theaters as well, and electronic devices like radio players, music players, that sort of stuff, cameras. Then we see more railways. The trains go faster than before. The steamships get larger than before. Steamships are going to be made out of steel instead of made out of wood. We're going to see that there's going to be more demand for natural resources, like I mentioned, oil and rubber, things, resources, materials that you need for the Industrial Revolution. And we're also going to see another kind of like agrarian revolution through the use of chemical fertilizers. So up to this point in world history, all fertilizers have been made by humans or animals, and normally it's poop, right? It's manure. But now we see chemical, right, where chemists can isolate certain chemicals like nitrogen, and use that to, kind of like maximize the amount of the nutrients in the soil. So nowadays, if you want to, have, grow flowers in your backyard, you're going to go buy a Miracle Grow at Home Depot. And Miracle Grow is a chemical fertilizer. It's not natural. But it, makes anything grow bigger and faster than normal. So chemical fertilizers will increase agricultural production. We also see the use of interchangeable parts. Now this is, has been going on for a while now. But basically, instead of handcrafting an item from beginning to end, the item, the product, like say a pistol, is going to be broken down into a whole bunch of different parts, and each one of these parts is interchangeable, which means that if I get the screw from one pistol, I can unscrew it and put it in another pistol of the same model, and it'll work just fine. So just like you nowadays can, if your car breaks down, and you need to buy a new radiator, right? You can buy any radiator that fits the model of your car and install it, and it'll work just fine. You don't have to buy a brand new car, and back then you'd have to buy a brand new pistol. So interchangeable parts means that the parts are, that you can switch it in and out. Therefore, it doesn't cost, you'd have to replace it. You just, the whole item, the whole product, you only replace the part that's malfunctioned, the part that's broken. So with this we see continued use of the division of labor, right? Where again, the factory workers are not producing the product, from step 1 through step 100. They're only doing one simple small step, one of many simple small steps, and other people are doing other small steps, and together the product is made from beginning to end. But this will cause the division of labors, right? So there's not going to be, craftsmen or artisans anymore. Handmade stuff is not going to be a common thing anymore, because again, everything's been broken down to more simplistic steps, and therefore you can make them faster than before, and therefore have more manufactured mass production of goods. And again, we mentioned this before with Henry Ford and the assembly line, how this is going to become the new standard for production. It is going to speed up production more than ever before, reduce the costs of manufactured goods more than ever before, and therefore make it more available for people. All right, so that is it for our video lecture. This is go through an overview of the Industrial Revolution, and you can pause this to read this if you want, but I'm not going to go over it. All right, so thank you for watching, and see you next time.